By the way, if anyone wants a recording of the lectures, I mean, the sessions, I could do that for them. Okay, Ryan J.
Sure.
All right, great. We can have a class about Ryan. Hannah K.
Here.
Okay, Demetrius K.
Here.
Okay, Riley L.
Here.
Okay, Katrina Lambert.
Here.
Okay, Sophia L. Oh, sorry. Do you go by Dana Sophia or just Sophia?
Just Sophia.
Okay. All right. Try and remember that. Shelby M.
Here.
Okay. Diana M.
Here.
John O.
Here.
Okay. Christina P.
Here.
Okay. Maya P.
Here.
Okay. John P.
Here.
Great. Nicholas R.
Here.
Dylan R.
Here.
Okay. Mary R.
Here.
Grace S.
Here.
Warren Spillers.
Here.
Good. Isabel S.
Here.
Ian Chow.
Here.
Morning, Ian, or good night, rather. Nicholas V.
Here.
Okay, Subin Y.
Here.
Wow. Oh my goodness. We have a full roster today. That's so exciting. 36 students. Excellent. Okay, so a couple of announcements before we get going. Number one, no class next week. Okay. So don't email me asking me for a Zoom link because we don't actually have class next week. I think it has to do something with the way that the spring break has been shortened. So it's only like 1 day of spring break. Unfortunately for you, and unfortunately for me, it's only 1 day spring break. I think this is the way it's going to go. But no, either way, no class next Wednesday for us at least. And I would challenge your other professors if they try to make you have class on Wednesday. I think it's like all campuses, do not have class on March 10th. The other thing is, we're approaching the midway part of the semester, believe it or not. That also means we have some due dates coming up. The first due date is your first review. It's due a little bit more than a month from now. So April 7th, it's due. Okay. So just I want to make sure you're aware of that. The other thing I want to make you aware of also, or just bring to your attention, is the extra credit assignments. So some of you have submitted some extra credit assignments. The vast majority of you haven't. That's fine. It's whatever. It's like you do whatever. Did we talk about last week with that Cornell presentation about racism in America? Did we talk about that with Russell Rickford? No. Okay. Did anyone, by the way, raise your hand if you attended that racism in America? No. Okay. Well, I don't know if. Oh, you did, Sebastian. Sebastian, we didn't talk about this last week.
Well, I had a question about it because I think it was posted after class.
Oh, sure.
But so I know when I looked on Blackboard, it had already passed that one because I know that it was only a few hours after the post. But I went to click it because I was just curious, and I saw that they had a recording of it. So I was wondering if we're allowed to like watch the recording and still write the review on it, even if we're not seeing it in live time.
Yeah, Sebastian, that's totally fine. Yeah, I can actually inquire about the recording for that, and I'll let people know. But if you can find it on your own and watch it, like on also just aside from this class, just aside from the fact that it's 2 points to your final grade, it is like Russell Rickford has such powerful statements there that just it made me rethink all of my experiences and so on. But it's really, really good.
Yeah, I was able to access the recording just by signing up as if you were looking at it on time, and then it'll have the option to replay the whole thing.
Oh, okay. So did everyone get that? So basically, I'll show you on the screen. If you click that link, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sebastian, but if you click that link on extra credit, down, well, not the Mary, we did talk about this, the Mary Thompson Wright lectures. But if you click, and this is not, so I guess you have to copy and paste this link into your URL. And then I guess, you know, it'll let you watch, replay the entire recording. Right? So you also can take advantage of this extra credit. So, okay, so I don't have to track down a recording. That's great. Yeah, if you want to submit that, like, you know, you can submit that at any time. And as they occur, I will be posting more extra credit assignments as well, you know, as I find them. But I'm glad that some people are interested. That's good. Any other questions about extra credit? Let me see if I have. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm gonna see if anyone has used extra credit. Some people in my other classes have maxed out their 10 points. They've just they went to 5 different things. Now they can't go to any more. Let me just see. Yeah, I have a whole column for extra credit points for this class and my other classes too. Looks like Allison went to 1 extra credit. Hannah did. A couple people did. Demetrios. Okay. Diana. Grace. Yeah. So a couple of people have been taking advantage of it. It's up to you. It's, you know, it's definitely going to enrich your experience of this class, and just, you know, you're gonna be able to get some things out of it, which is good. Okay, now let's move on to the review. I just want to, you know, I did post a format of the review, of what the different components in a film review, just so that we're all on the same page. I'd like for us to go through this together. This is pretty simple. It comes from Duke University. Oh, great. Thank you, Mary. Mary just posted a link for Racism in America. Let me just make sure. Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, if you want to watch this over again, you know, be my guest, and then write up a one page reflection of your experience, and then you'll get 2 extra credit points, you know, towards your final grade. Not to mention it will supplement a lot of things you're learning in this class that you have learned so far. Okay, let's now look at the film review format. Okay, so this lists 5 different, and you can read this, you can read parts of this on your own, but this lists 5 different components of the film review that I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to make sure I'm sharing with you. Okay, so one of the first things that I would do when trying to prepare for the film review is to see what other film reviewers have already written about that film. Okay, so this is going to be easier for you because 2 things. First of all the films we're reviewing in this class are historical films. So there's been tons written about these films. Okay, number 1. Number 2, we're also reading a lot of those film reviews in class. You know, every session we're reading, you know, getting a context of what critics are saying about this film in class. We're reading them together. So that's already, you know, a lot of preparation for you. But what you can also do in preparing for the film review, because you're going to be writing historical film reviews, taking a historical perspective on these films, is attempt, you know, perhaps go back over your notes for the readings that you had for these films, depending on which film that you've selected, and make some connections between the scholarship that you're reading and the film that you're reviewing. Okay, so I think a clear connection can be made with Mr. Blanding's Builds His Dream House and the suburbanization, but that's something we'll get into. Okay, so just, you know, reviewing the different reviews and then, you know, connecting it to scholarship is going to help you a long way to completing this. But there are 5 different components that are in multiple different all kind of different film reviews. And I'll just go for them really quickly. You can read this on your own. Essentially just an introduction. And that means giving like a framework for your analysis. You can start by a kind of anecdotal description of a scene in a film, or you can, this is opportunity for you to use your own creative freedom and how you want to structure this film. Number two, and this should be the smallest, number two, number three should be the shortest components of your film review: the plot summary and description. Okay, so plot summary, as we know, is a little bit different than the story. Okay, so plot is the way in which the story is conveyed in the film. Okay, so not every second of a story is going to be included in a plot, but the plot is definitely a way of understanding that experience. So there's plot summary and there's descriptions. Description is a detailed description of a particular cinematic experience of watching the film. So it's really a more of a stepping back and in providing some elaborating on your experience as a viewer of the film. The analysis is I'd like that to be the bread and butter, as it were, of your film review. Okay, so that's where a lot of the analysis of the film, the praise, the critique, but also the historical commentary of the film, and that's where I'd like that to come through in your review. Okay, and then finally, the conclusion. Okay, this is where I'm going to ask you to. I'm going to be looking for you to evaluate the film about whether or not it stands up to and would resonate with today's audience, or if not, why? If it does, why? So basically, is this film still relevant to today? Okay. And so this little PDF says you can see examples of film reviews in all of these different publications, which you're actually reading. I think the only one we're not reading is Rolling Stone. Okay, but it's pretty similar. They all follow pretty similar formats. Okay. Any questions about this so far? No? Okay. That means it's time for the mini lecture, which I'm not really, I think I have to drink some more coffee. Yeah, Katrina, what's going on? How you doing?
I think you were saying that we can choose our own film. Does it have to be a film that we've watched in the class already, or is it like open to any film that talks about New York City?
At first I thought to ask you to review any film that we've watched in this class, but I think it's okay as long as it relates to New York City history and you were able to relate it to New York City history. So to answer your question, you could choose any film, preferably that fits within one of the weeks that we're doing, whether it be suburbanization, the Great Depression, or we're going to be doing Latinx immigration next week, or rather on the 17th, but any film. What film were you thinking about, Katrina?
I'll have to see if it does connect to one of our weeks, but I know I've watched You've Got Mail a lot, and they talk a lot about kind of consumerism and brands and how I guess businesses are taking over independent bookstores. So I feel like there's a lot of city development and stuff there.
Really? I've never
Yeah.
seen the movie. I thought it was just about Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks.
I think at least from my, I guess what I would comment on is the love story is kind of just a distraction from the consumerism, I guess more because there's brands everywhere in the film, they're Starbucks, and then there's the chain bookstores, and they're holding they're there's so many brands just everywhere in the story. It seems like a very marketable type of movie.
Oh, interesting. By the way, has anyone raise your hand if you ever seen the movie John Carpenter's Them? John, because that sounds very familiar. I guess no one has. Oh no, it's called They Live. Raise your hand virtually if you've seen They Live. No one? Okay, so I'm actually going to play this trailer for you because I'm still trying to get into my headspace of lecturing in a moment. But similar kind of thing, Katrina. This is so this person. So I'll just let the trailer. Oh God. You know, I have YouTube TV and I still get ads like this. It's so annoying. Okay, can you all see this? Okay. We are going to be watching a John Carpenter film, Escape from New York. This comes 6 years after Escape from New York was made. Oh.
We have no other choice.
I don't like this one bit. Leave it alone, man. It ain't none of my business. Ain't none of yours.
We have been lulled into a
Sorry, folks. Someone said the sound is low.
Listen to what I'm saying to you. We're in trouble. The whole world's in trouble. Control us! You're sending some kind of secrets on TV sets.
I've got one that can see.
Mama don't like tattletale.
Now we start spilling some blood. Let's go!
But
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick it. And I'm all out of bubble.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting film. It follows a kind of similar dystopian narrative that we will the kind that we will be watching in Escape from New York. You know, it's action packed, but it's packed also with social commentary. This social commentary, at least, you know, pertains to crass advertisement and commercialism and the way it can kind of controls society, or that's what it's kind of depicting. So no one's ever seen that before, heard of it. It's kind of a strange thing. I've come here to kick ass and choose bubblegum. I've ran all out of bubblegum. Jack, do you want to say something?
Yeah, that's the movie where like he wears the glasses and it like tells you everything behind the ad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen like Zizek talk about it before.
Yeah. And I've seen little clips and analyses, but basically it's like he's able to put on these glasses and see through like the illusion that commercialism presents to us. Yeah. Anyway, so if you want to do that, even though it's not about New York City, it definitely does talk about some of the themes that we will be talking about in this class. You know, you can totally do that. Okay, so I guess we're getting into the mini lecture now. So let me transition really quick to the lecture itself. Okay, how did I do this before? Okay. Okay, you all can see the screen now, right? Katrina, can you see it? Is it cut off or no? Is the screen cut off? No? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so suburbanization. So this movie is all about suburbanization, right? It's about, you know, an urban dweller who gets kind of fed up, and we'll analyze some of the reasons why he moved out of the city. But an urban dweller who gets, and certainly an upper middle class urban dweller, even though he's making $15,000 a year, it's his salary. It's what they say in the film. So sorry, Sebastian, do you have a question really quick?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if it's just me, but it's I can only see like half of the slide.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it is cut off just a little bit.
Okay, let me try to figure this out. Okay, is that better or no?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Still cut off though?
Yeah.
Only a little bit though.
How about that?
Yeah, now I see the whole thing.
That's all. Do you see the whole thing? Okay. So right. So this is a movie all about suburbanization. So in it we can see some of the reasons why people move out to the suburbs, but also kind of advertising for suburban living. That's kind of couched in this romantic comedy. So I'm just looking at the chat. Brianna Baker concurs that it's a little cut off. Okay, so we'll get into some of the particulars about why Mr. Blandings and his family moved to the city, as well as some of the other aspects of the film which I think are pertinent to keep in mind. In the film, we also see kind of traces of the Jim Crow era, particularly with regard to the depiction of a singular Black person in the film that's kind of cast as almost a mammy figure, if you remember, to the Jim Crow archetypes of the mammy. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit that later, but I want to go into some of the history behind suburbanization. Okay, so we have this kind of prevailing narrative in American history that suburbanization begins after the in what is called the post-war era. The post-war era means that the era after World War II. Okay, so we have this narrative and the popular understanding that suburbanization begins after World War II, when United States veterans come back. They participate in all these kinds of benefits for veterans, namely the Veterans Affairs Association, as well as various housing incentives. Many of those housing incentives were explicitly tinged with the racism of those times, specifically barring non-white people from participating in those benefits. So, which kind of contributes to the development of what is known as kind of white suburbs. But there is a much longer and more complicated backstory to this. Okay, so suburbanization in the United States begins well before but well before the post-war era. And we can start to see this early suburbanization in the 1920s. If you think back to 2 weeks ago, we read Lewis Mumford, The Intolerable City, right? And so Lewis Mumford, and by the way, this is a kind of a Mumfordian movie in ways. We'll get into that in a bit. There's that opening scene where it's like so romantically describing New York City and Manhattan in particular. In almost a Mumford, it's like almost Mumford wrote the screenplay for this, the way he's describing it. But if you think back to that early Mumford reading we have from 1927, he's saying that the city is intolerable for all these reasons. Okay, and it's almost like this film was created to kind of illustrate that the intolerable condition of cities this time, particularly regarding the way Mr. Blandings feels confined in his 3-bedroom apartment, which I was watching it last night. And that's a huge apartment for today's, especially for today's, like a place in Manhattan. That's like a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment. Not to mention they have an extra bedroom for their maid that lives with them. So that's a huge bedroom apartment. And I was like, what? How can you afford this at $15,000 a year? But anyway, there's a long and complicated history in this that goes back all the way to the 1920s. And so people started moving out to the suburbs as early as the 1920s. In fact, even earlier than that. And so the reason why there isn't this mass migration of people moving out to the suburbs in the 1920s is particularly because there isn't the governmental infrastructure that enables this mass migration in the 1940s. And so we'll talk about 2 aspects of that governmental infrastructure, namely the Federal Housing Authority, and along with that, the Federal Housing Authority and the Veterans Affairs Association. Okay. So a lot of the issues that Mr. Blanding starts to experience in 1948, they were already present in 1927. Okay. So this happens with this immense growth of cities at the end of the 19th century. It's early. And people are responding to this. People are responding to this in big ways. So in 1899, this is one of the first huge waves of migration. But of course, the much bigger wave in the 1940s doesn't really occur until those pieces of governmental infrastructure are put in place. So by 1890, there are already wealthier citizens that began moving out to the suburbs because of congested slums, congested urban living. Also violence and labor conflicts that are happening at this time, as well as higher property taxes that the governments are asking these wealthier citizens to pay to kind of address a lot of the inequities in the cities. And so wealthier citizens, people like Mr. Blandings, start to move out to the suburbs as early as 1890 because of those conditions. Okay, those who can afford to travel furthest can also afford the most expensive homes, kind of like Mr. Blanding. Mr. Blanding is just like, shelling out thousands of dollars, every single turn. Significant portions of his yearly income to create this dream. And as I was watching it, it occurred to me that this is a really illustration of the American dream. That I'm thinking particularly about that sequence where Mr. Blandings and Mrs. Blandings goes out to Greenwich, Connecticut, and is led around by this kind of shady real estate broker. And he's like, oh, this is a really great house. It has historical potential, despite the fact that it's completely structurally unsound. And both Mr. Blandings and Mrs. Blandings have their visions of what could be. Okay. And I took that literally as an illustration of the American dream as it was depicted in this film. And as it was depicted by suburban developers. And we'll talk about one suburban developer in particular, Levitt, Joseph Levitt, creates these suburban communities called Levitt towns, which you may have heard of before. Okay, so this early suburbanization happens as early as the 1890s in response to all of these different things that are taking place. A lot of them are depicted in the movie itself. Okay. Okay, now we're getting to those two pieces of infrastructure I wanted to talk about. So here, yeah. So we already have suburban living, so this kind of wave of suburbanism by the 1890s. Okay, and one thing that I thought was really interesting that kind of illustrates this suburbanization is, this growth of trolley cars that connects the urban center to its outlying suburbs. Okay, so by this time, by the 1890s, there's a massive investment in this kind of urban infrastructure to connect the suburbs, this growing suburbs in the 1890s, to the city center. And so all of the suburbs, especially New Jersey, there was a robust system of trolley cars that would connect you to the urban center. They just give you a little bit of insight into how extensive that trolley car system was. Basically, right now, as it stands with our present state of transportation, it takes like more than 3 hours to take, unless you're taking Excella, Amtrak, it takes more than 3 hours to get from Philadelphia to New York City if you're taking trains alone. Okay, so if you're starting in New York City, you got to go to Penn Station, get on New Jersey Transit, and that'll take you to as far as Trenton. And at Trenton, you have to transfer over to a SEPTA line, which then will take you into the heart of Philadelphia. And all told, that journey is about 2.5 or 3 hours. Okay, but in the 1890s, a journey like that would only take you maybe an hour and a half, about half that time. And it's because of this extensive system of trolleys. Okay, so they're not just in New York and not just in New Jersey, but also, in the outlying boroughs of New York as well, there was this extensive trolley systems. Okay, so we don't see a lot of these trolley systems. We can perhaps see the remnant of these trolley systems on certain streets that have not been completely paved over, where you can see actually trolley tracks on the streets themselves. In fact, my hometown in essentially what is the middle of New Jersey, Middlesex County, there are still little trolley tracks that go back to the 1890s. They used to connect my little borough of Middlesex, New Jersey, to the major metropolitan hubs, Newark, and then to New York. Those trolley systems and that extent of robust public transportation no longer exists. Okay, a lot of that infrastructure was demolished and divested, okay, in favor for a new styles of infrastructure, particularly regarding highway construction. Okay, so highways essentially replaced these trolley systems. And by the way, in terms of ecological sustainability, many of these trolleys were also very much environmentally friendly. So they're electric trolley systems. The same kind of trolley system. these trolley systems exist still today. The remnants of these trolley systems exist today in places like Pittsburgh and San Francisco. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever been to San Francisco and have been on the trolley in San Francisco. No one has. Well, I'll just say that these are only remnants of a much more robust trolley system that had existed before. And so today, if you go to San Francisco and take the trolley, it's really only, it's like an amusement ride. Okay. When back in the 1890s, when suburbs began to grow during this time, they were like the main lifeline between the outlying urban areas and the city center. Gabrielle says that she thinks that that you can still see trolley tracks on Dumbo near Red Hook, in Red Hook. Yes, that's true. I know specifically at Red Hook that's true. I don't know if those tracks, because I do drive into Red Hook, especially go to food shopping every so often. And I remember riding over train tracks that seemingly aren't used at all. So I'm not sure if those tracks in Red Hook were for trolleys or for trains delivering, because Red Hook was this huge industrial port. So I don't know same thing with Dumbo. So I don't know if those tracks were used for conveying passengers or conveying freights, cargo from the ships that have unloaded. I'm not sure, but yes, those are examples of similarly unused urban infrastructures that have been replaced by automobile infrastructure, namely highways, especially with the transportation of goods and cargo and stuff like that. So that's all to say that, this suburbanization that we see in the 1940s, and Mr. Blanning's built his dream house, this has a longer history of people moving to the suburbs because they're just fed up with the cities. Okay. And we don't see this mass migration of urban dwellers to suburban areas until we get to implementation, until we have two pieces of government infrastructure that actually occur that are put in place in the 1930s. Okay, so the two that I'm thinking of are, so you have the home loan. I'll write this down on a piece of paper as well, or a blank sheet. There's also a whiteboard too with Zoom. Gosh, this Zoom sucks. I'm done with the pandemic. I'm over this. I could easily write this on a whiteboard in class, but for here I have to figure out how do I translate this to. Anyway, so let me show you. So the New Deal is a big thing. So the New Deal has a lot of unintended or perhaps thinly veiled consequences for race in America, race and society in America. And one of the consequences is this process called redlining. So there's a lot of different benefits that come through in this New Deal package, which is essentially trying to reinvigorate the American economy after the Great Depression. But what ends up happening is it creates a lot more problems than what we begin with. So the first I want to focus in on, this is something that Kenneth Jackson highlights specifically, the homeowners Loan Corporation and the FHA, the Federal Authority. I think this is 1934 and 1933. Okay, just appease my OCD for a moment. So one thing to know about the Homeowners Loan Corporation is that this is a policy. So there's a fundamental difference in the response to Great Depression between two subsequent administrations. There's the Hoover administration, and there's the FDR's administration, Franklin. Okay, I'm going to talk briefly about the difference between Herbert Hoover and FDR for a moment, and then we're going to go back to like how this translates to racial disparity in cities, going forward for the rest of the 20th century. So coincidentally, I think I talked a little bit about Woodrow Wilson in the previous lecture. If not, basically one of the ways to think about Woodrow Wilson, particularly with regard to like domestic social policies in America, Woodrow Wilson comes to power in 1912, is reelected in 1920. So Woodrow Wilson, you can think about Woodrow Wilson is he brings Jim Crow to the national stage, right? So he is a Southern statesman. It comes out of the Southern institutions in Virginia, and once but also it's seemingly contradictorily is also progressive. Okay, so he's a progressive in the sense that he wants to ameliorate a lot of the social inequities that comes with industrialization, social stratification that happens between the wealthy industrialists and the people that work for them. So he wants to attenuate many of those inequities, but in doing so, he exacerbates a lot of the racial inequities. Okay, so one of the first things that Woodrow Wilson does in the White House is segregates all federal facilities. Okay, and that means in the White House itself, as well as in the federal branches. He segregates the military, segregates the White House. He actually creates like a separate dining facility in the White House specifically for non-white people, so that his white employees don't have to eat lunch with the black employees. Not only that, but he fires all of the senior White House officials that are non-white as well. Who does this? Who actually carries out this order? It's actually Franklin Delano Roosevelt, at the time Assistant Secretary of Navy. He's working in the White House under the Woodrow Wilson administration. Okay, who else is also working in the White House? Herbert Hoover is also working alongside FDR in the White House in Wilson's administration. Herbert Hoover becomes the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture. Okay. And he is supposed to be, overseeing war rations and the way in which American people at home can help supplement the war effort by conserving what they consume at home, so that they can allocate those kind of materials and surplus to the war effort abroad. Okay, so Herbert Hoover and FDR are working side by side in Woodrow Wilson's administration during World War I. Okay. Later on, Herbert Hoover uses that experience to gain political office in 1932. Not 1932. I think in 1932. But anyway, he gets in office, and the Great Depression it hits in 1929 for various different reasons. Okay, we won't go into the reasons, but what's significant here, and it's going to tell us a little bit about their housing policies. Is that both Herbert Hoover and FDR have very different ways of responding to the Great Depression, okay? And it has to do with their political ideologies, okay? So Herbert Hoover is a very conservative in his political ideology, and I'll explain what I mean by conservative. So that's a big broad category. And FDR, conversely, is a very liberal politician. Okay, so what do I mean here? Okay, when we talk about conservative and liberal, fundamentally what we're talking about is how do we view the role of the federal government, or how do we view the role of just centralized government in general? Okay, so in the modern political spectrum, conservatives view the role of the federal government, or the role of any kind of centralized government, as being very limited. Okay, so conservatives think that the federal government should be very, very small. Okay, that there should be very, very limited centralized government. Okay, so limited. And liberals, conversely, generally believe that the role of the federal government or any kind of central government should be expansive. Okay, and there's a long tradition of this spectrum, and I'll go into it a little bit because we're coming away from some of the main ideas I wanted to express in this lecture. So expansive. So this difference between liberal and conservative political ideologies goes way back, in Western philosophy, right? And specifically for the American context, it goes back to the American Revolution. You can even trace it back to the Glorious Revolution in England in the 1760s, I think it was. But basically, it's like, the conservatives after the American Revolution, they were very wary of having any centralized government having a lot of power, because they didn't want essentially a ruling monarch to come back into the United States and basically replicate the authority of the crown. Okay, so that's part of where the conservative tradition comes from in America, like the fear of centralized government basically replicating a monarchy. Right, it's the very reason why we rebelled from the UK to begin with. Okay, so the liberal tradition, kind of, doesn't want to replicate that monarchical, hierarchy, but does. The reason why most liberals want the expansive form of government is because they're like, okay. Another thing here, states, emphasis on states. So if conservatives say that there should be a very, very small centralized government, very, very small powers of the federal government, they're saying rather the states should govern themselves. Okay, that's why, part of the reason why I think that, you see in conservative administrations, like I'm thinking specifically, I don't know why, but I'm thinking specifically, well, part because I'm reading about it. Richard Nixon's administration, which we're going to come up into in a bit. So Richard Nixon's, and that's a good another analogy. The difference between Richard Nixon and LBJ, right? LBJ is very much a liberal-oriented politician, and he views the role of the federal government as very expansive. Okay, so that's where you see a lot of huge government programs that come through in the Great Society legislation of the 1960s. Okay. When it comes to 1968, when Richard Nixon is elected, he undermines many of those federal programs, and rather, takes all that federal money and just gives it out to the states for the states to do with what they see fit. Okay, so that's a big difference. That's a good example that stresses the difference between the liberals and conservatives in terms of the role of the federal government. Okay, similar dichotomy here with Herbert Hoover and FDR, except it's converse. When Herbert Hoover comes into power in 1928, I believe, and so he comes into power, and it's like, okay, not two years later, he comes into power, there's a huge, devastating economic crash. And how does he respond to this crash? He does so according to his conservative political ideology. He's saying that the states should fend for themselves. Okay, the states, the federal government's going to give states money, but the states are going to do with those monies what they see fit for their states. Okay, and when it comes time for FDR to take charge and to respond to the Great Depression, he's going to do that, but in a much different way, because he's going to say that, okay, there needs to be a concerted effort, not conservative, a concerted effort among all the states. Okay, because what ends up happening with this conservative, emphasis is that, citizens, like each state has, of course, their own different problems. But if you just let states do whatever they want, with federal monies, and to create their own responses, what ends up happening is that citizens within those states are, it's an unequal playing field. It's that, like, not everyone in those states are going to be experiencing the benefits of the federal government in equal ways. Okay, so the fundamental difference between FDR and Herbert Hoover has to do with their political outlook in terms of what is the role of the federal government. Now it comes to the homeowners loan corporation. Okay, this is something that Jackson, Kenneth Jackson, kind of talks about specifically. So the homeowners loan corporation is specifically a response to the Great Depression. So how are we going to reinvigorate the economy? Well, one way is to put freezes on the banks, right, or to kind of restructure the banks. But and they basically do that uniformly, you know, between the FDR administration and the Herbert Hoover's administration. They both put place, you know, restrictions and restructuring methods on banks. But you know, for Herbert Hoover, he's saying, listen, I'm really emphasizing that the states must do this for themselves, whereas FDR is saying, no, the federal government's going to take care of all of the states. We're going to do this, you know, from the top down. Another way of reinvigorating the economy is reinvigorating the housing industry. Okay, and it follows similar faults along, along the lines of political ideology. Herbert Hoover puts in place the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which what that does is it refinances mortgages and debts, and it helps people get loans for moving out to the suburbs. Okay, but this is really done through the private sector, and more specifically done on the state level. Whereas, you know, by 1934, with the creation of the Federal Housing Authority, right, that's really done on a federal level. Okay, and it has a much deeper impact on society. Okay, but there's so it is somewhat successful in kind of, you know, doling out favorable mortgage rates for people that want to move out to the suburbs, and to some extent reinvigorating the economy. But it also has very negative impacts on society on the long terms. Okay, we're going to go into those, what I mean by that in the lecture. So let me return back to the lecture now. So some of the negative impacts. Let me stop by and just ask you real quick, are there any questions so far? If you have any questions, just raise your hand or type it in the chat. I'm more than happy to go into it. And I know I've gone on kind of a digression, but I just don't want you to lose track. Okay. Okay. So one of the biggest impacts that these policies have on American society and long term. Oh, it looks like someone has a chat. So Batul is asking, perhaps this is off topic to what we're talking about, but does this phenomenon of white flight have to do with what you're talking about, suburbanization? So white flight is something we're talking about that we'll be talking about in a few minutes, suburbanization and redlining. They're all tied to these New Deal policies, specifically the FHA and the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which we'll get to. So all of these things are connected to suburbanization. We'll get to that in a second. Thank you for bringing that up, Batul. Okay. So all of these New Deal policies, specifically the FHA and the HOLC, that continues on the FDR's administration, have deep impacts on American society. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the FHA insures millions, right, of long-term mortgages issued by banks. At the same time, the federal government itself built thousands of low-cost housing units, right, public housing units. But New Deal housing policies represented a remarkable departure from previous government practices, specifically those under the Herbert Hoover's administration, because it kind of elevates Herbert Hoover's responses to a federal level, you know, according to the more liberal perspective of the role of the federal government. Okay, thanks to the FHA and later the Veterans Administration, home ownership became within reach of tens of millions of families within about a decade of its implementation in 1934. Okay, so soon after the implementation, so by 1944, 10 years after the FHA was created, you know, this is when we start to see this mass migration of people out to the suburbs. And we're going to talk about specifically who those people are and what the suburbs are going to look like in a second. So one of the big things that the FHA does is that this is a powerful government agency that goes on to reinforce racial segregation in the North as well as in the South, exacerbating existing racial boundaries that we saw in the Jim Crow era legislation, in last week or 2 weeks ago. Okay, the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, had no hesitation about insuring mortgages that contained clauses that barred future sales to non-white buyers. So specifically, they are creating incentives for people to move out to the cities. Okay, and why are they creating incentives for people to move out to the cities? Well, it's a process of reinvigorating the economy by stimulating essentially the construction business, okay, the construction industries in the United States. So the federal government is giving out tax breaks and tax incentives for people to move out to the cities, okay, but they're doing so in specifically racial terms, which we'll get to in a second. Okay, we're going to see this policy again in the 1970s, where there are going to be municipal, federal, and state incentives to get people and to get corporations to move back into the cities in the 1970s, 1980s, with similar kinds of things, right? Tax abatements, okay, favorable low interest rates on mortgages, right? These are all policies and incentives that that all levels of government are going to reintroduce by the 1970s to bring people back to the cities. And the reason for that is to reinvigorate the economy again. Okay. There are a few processes by which that white suburbs are specifically created, that this racial segregation occurs. Okay. There are three processes, and I'll write these down for you. Kind of touching on what Batul just mentioned. Okay, I'll write those down. So number one is, of course, redlining. Number two is steering. It's called steering. I'll get into what these mean in a second. Okay. And then block busting. Okay. I'd also put parentheses contract buying too is a big deal here. So we'll get into what these mean in just a second. Okay. So number one, redlining. Okay. So basically redlining has to do with the way in which, and I guess I'll toggle back here. We'll start with redlining. Redlining has to do with the way in which federal aid through the Veterans Administration and through the Federal Housing Administration is allocated to people on the ground. Okay, so how is federal aid allocated? Well, basically, it's allocated through public-private partnership in the 1930s between government appraisers. So government workers that are appraising neighborhoods based on whether or not it's a favorable return on investment for the federal government, and a combination between that and workers in insurance companies. So basically, what happens is, and we'll use example of Manhattan and Brooklyn, is that government appraisers working with insurance companies are going out into these neighborhoods. And if this is a map of upper Manhattan and lower Manhattan, and then Brooklyn over here, going out to these neighborhoods, and based on criteria that they've generated, they are evaluating, okay, who is not going to get these benefits. And what ends up happening is that many of these loans, these favorable interest rate loans, are denied to many non-white communities within the cities. Okay. So, and you can see that specifically in the way in which these insurance maps, and these are insurance maps, are drawn out. Okay, so the areas created in red or colored in red, those are the most hazardous areas that are deemed hazardous by these insurance appraisers. Okay, and they're calling these hazardous areas because of a mixture of very different things. They're saying they're hazardous because there are often low income areas, okay, not very affluent areas, but also it's a racial diversity in these areas as well. Okay, so whether or not people got benefits depended on whether or not they were white. Okay, so oftentimes non-white communities and lesser affluent communities did not get these benefits, and specifically that means those areas and those communities that were literally drawn in red. Okay, Yellow, of course, if you go on the spectrum, is, it's risky but not hazardous. So they'll get some benefits in these areas. Then, of course, blue is a little bit better. And then green is, of course, the most favorable areas in terms of allocating federal aid. Okay. What ends up happening, however, is that ultimately, categorically, non-white communities are not given favorable interest rates and not given all the benefits, whereas mostly white and middle-class neighborhoods are given these benefits, creating this kind of racial disparity in terms of allocating and who can participate in these federal benefits. Okay, and that's number one. Let's talk number two now. Where is it? Okay, steering. Okay, steering is a little bit different. Steering has to do with directly directing. So this has to do with directing minority buyers solely to homes in minority neighborhoods. Okay, so to be sure that there were non-white people that did move out to the suburbs. Okay, but steering refers to this process by which real estate agents would steer these suburban dwellers to areas of concentrated poverty, for example, or areas that were typically deemed and constructed as minority communities. Okay, so steering is a process by which racial segregation is exacerbated in the North through specific real estate practices. And then finally, blockbusting is a big deal. So blockbusting is essentially the way in which real estate investors were playing off white fears to encourage whites to sell their homes at low prices to real estate companies, which they could then resell to minorities at higher prices. So basically saying, real estate companies saying, hey, they're coming into these neighborhoods. Hey, do you want to buy, can I buy your home? And the people are like, no. Like, well, you know what? This neighborhood's rapidly changing, and the more it changes, the lower the value of your house is going to be. So you better sell to us now. And oftentimes they did sell out, and these real estate investors did make a lot of money by buying this property at a very low value and reselling it at a higher value and pocketing the earnings from that. Okay, this is also known as contract buying. Okay, so what contract buying is the way in which insurance mortgages in Black areas were basically forcing Black people to buy homes on contract. Okay, what that meant is that they would buy homes on contract because they weren't able to participate in a lot of these federal benefits. They would buy on contract from shady speculators who sold the homes at exploitative prices after they basically chased off many of the white people that were living there by stoking their fears. Okay, so basically what happens if you buy a house on contract, what ends up happening is that if a family misses a payment on this contract, right, the speculator who owns the home would then evict that family, okay, and resell it to another unsuspecting family and pocket the first family's down payment and monthly installments. Okay, this is what is known as contract buying, which contributed to the racial segregation in the North, but also a lot of the animosity that we see that develops in the 1950s, racial animosity that develops in the 1950s and 1960s, where you have not only racial segregation, but concentration of poverty in urban areas as well. Okay, so both government and real estate practices turned Black people into pariahs, okay, whom most feared would bring mayhem and drive down home values. And this is essentially what many white people were fearing, that the more non-white people come into their neighborhoods, the more it would drive down real estate values. Okay, that's a huge fear. One newspaper from 1947 is called the Los Angeles Sentinel, and I'll transfer us back to Mr. Blandings for a moment. In 1947, a year before this movie comes out, the Los Angeles Sentinel, which is actually a Black newspaper, reported that banks won't lend money and title companies won't guarantee titles to Blacks in what they regard as white communities, even when no valid restrictions exist. Okay, so this widespread racism that was practiced among both government officials and real estate companies was widely known. Okay, and it was widely known among the white residents as well. A white resident of Hawthorne, California, claimed to represent the feelings of 99% of the people when he argued that blacks, he says, should be placed in their own communities, with their own churches, with their own schools and recreation facilities. Keep in mind, this is not Birmingham, Alabama. This is Hawthorne, suburban Hawthorne, California. Not unlike suburban New Jersey this time, which is rapidly developing. He also said that this segregation would certainly be one of the finest things that can happen to this region in terms of economic development. So real estate developers really played into many of these fears held in the minds of many white suburbanites. Okay, one of the most specific, direct, tangible links that we have between real estate developers and the fears of white suburbanites comes through this history of development of white suburbs, specifically through developers like William Levitt. So these things called Levitt towns were planned communities that were created in the 1940s, specifically through mass-produced homes, a little bit different than we saw in Mr. Blandings, but nonetheless mass-produced suburban dwellings that were specifically organized to be white zones, right? White spaces. Okay, so these settlements were built according to William Levitt's specifications as places for specifically members, quote, members of the Caucasian race. Okay, as in the South, whites used intimidation and violence to keep blacks out of these spaces that they considered their own. Okay, and this happened in incidences of racial violence, towards black people that were moving into these white neighborhoods. For example, in 1958, in a similar suburban California, a family called the Holmes family, they returned home one day and found their black family, returned home, found their driveway splattered with paint, okay? And their windows were broken by rocks. And their house, their new suburban house, not unlike the new suburban house that Mr. Blandings builds, was spray painted. And on their house it read, "Black cancer here, don't let it spread." Okay, this was an endemic situation for suburbs across the country, not just in California, but also suburbs in New Jersey and Connecticut as well. And that, it seems in retrospect that this creation of the white suburbs was not far removed from the, racial segregation that the country had experienced in the South in the wake of the Civil War, especially after the passing of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. And so we see the suburbs, especially in the 1940s, after the release of this film, are really coming into their own as specifically segregated spaces, and they're orchestrated as such, both through the governmental infrastructure that we discussed, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, FHA. So the government is doing this, and also the private sector, the real estate developers are doing this. Okay, they're playing into this, stoking on the fears of racial integration in order to reinvigorate the economy and for these real estate companies to make money, right, hand in hand. Okay, and we see a little bit of this in Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House, but yeah, maybe we can talk about that in our discussion sections. So that's about it for the mini lecture I had for you. But at this point, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, so let's start talking now about Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House. So in order to do that, I would like us to, I'll play a quick a trailer, and there are some scenes that I actually want to analyze in particular. Okay, so let me transition now to the scenes that I want us to watch. Okay. So this is just the re-release trailer. And I'll put the volume up for us. Can everyone see this? Can you hear it? Everything's good?
From the times of ancient cliff dwellers to the times of today, the today of modern cliff dwellers, down through the centuries, man has constantly improved his living conditions. Mr. Blandings builds his dream house. Direct from the pages of the best-selling novel comes the laugh and love riot of the year, starring the husband,
Oops, sorry, folks.
the wife, and the wolf she knew in college.
I'm just gonna get some coffee. I'll be right back.
And mortgages on the love nest he was building for his bride. Let's see what the bride was doing.
Good night. What a wonderful friend.
What's with this kissing all of a sudden?
What's that?
Just because a man is helpful in a business way doesn't give him extracurricular privileges with my wife.
That's a fine thing to say about a friend of 15 years.
But I don't like it. Every time he goes out of this house, he shakes my hand and he kisses you.
Prefer it the other way around.
Okay, great. Also, I wanted to touch on something Batul brought up. This, okay, is this concept. I know I'm all over the place this morning, but one thing I wanted to bring up as well before we get into specific things is this process called white flight. Okay, so what we see. I'm gonna put this. I'm putting this in quotations for reasons I'll explain. Okay, white flight. Okay, so what white flight refers to is this mass exodus we see of particularly white middle class residents, urban residents, to the suburbs. Okay, and I put it in quotes because for a long time historians have considered this a kind of flight, right? Flight because of a new because new non-white communities are moving into cities after both waves of the Great Migration, both in the 1920s and then again after World War II. There is a mass migration of Black people and non-white people generally, because it's not just Black people, into cities. And next week, well, 2 weeks, we'll talk about Latinx immigration that takes place in the 1960s. But basically, historians used to think that, and many still do, but it's not the full picture, that this process of white people moving out of the suburbs is a kind of flight because of the fears of integration that go along with that, along the lines of that integration, racial integration, is going to actually decrease homeowner values. Okay, but really, it's really an encouraged. It's something. It's a movement that's encouraged. It's not necessarily white people fleeing to the suburbs, right? It's actually an encouraged movement. The government is encouraging it, and that the real estate investors and corporations are encouraging it, and that corresponds to that kind of push-pull dynamic that I think that we discussed with the Great Migration. There's always push and pull factors, right? Push and pull. I'll put it up here. So pull factor could be that low interest rates. For white people to move out to the suburbs, low interest rates that the government is creating, and the real estate companies are really playing into as well. Okay, pull also has to do with the fact that there's new highway construction. Oops. And there's two periods of highway construction that are really important. There's highway construction in 1931 there's huge highway construction in 1931 through part of Herbert Hoover's response. So basically saying is like one way we can get out of the Great Depression is just by building things. However, and we see this replicated at FDR's level. However, the fundamental difference again is that Herbert Hoover is like, okay, states, you build highways for yourselves, right? Whereas FDR is like, no, we're going to do this on a federal level, and we're going to really do it. And so that's a difference. So highway construction is really pulling people out to the suburbs, capitalizing on the advent of all of this infrastructure that is conveying people to the suburbs. So pull factors is highway construction at two crucial times, and right after the Great Depression. But then again in 1956, it's called the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. Where in the Eisenhower administration, and a very conservative administration, kind of tying back to the Herbert Hoover's administration, nonetheless implements this Interstate Highway Act, which really also kind of galvanizes the growth of suburbs. Okay, but there's also push factors. These are just some that I'm touching on. Yeah, inherent racism in the suburbs as well, that we saw in examples of like that Holmes family in California, where they come back and they find their house vandalized because their white neighbors just don't want them there. Okay. Push factors are inherent racism. But one thing I would like to stress is that, the push and pull factors, at least in terms of white flight, they're really, part and parcel of one another. The real estate and the government are both impinged with this racism, and they're playing into the racism of many of these suburban developers, landowners as well. Okay, so white flight is this process of push and pull that's associated with the growth of white suburbs in the 1940s and 1950s. Okay, the next clip I wanted to show was that opening scene, that almost Mumfordian opening scene that kind of celebrates New York City. Okay. I think there's
Manhattan, glistening modern giant of concrete and steel, reaching to the heavens and cradling in its arms 7 million. 7 million. Happy beneficiaries of the advantages and comforts this great metropolis has to offer. Its fine, wide boulevards facilitate the New Yorker's carefree, orderly existence. Transportation system second to none in passenger comfort. Quaint little sidewalk cafes make for leisurely, gracious living. For its nature lovers, the peace and privacy of a day in the sun. The city offers delightful changes in climate. I suppose you're wondering what all this has to do with Mr. Blandings and his dream house.
Yeah, I'm wondering too, and that's what I'm going to ask you. So basically, in the depiction, it's kind of a Mumfordian in the sense that it is celebrating the city, but also then adding a kind of satirical commentary on urban life. Right? He's saying that the city is great, but it has all of these issues. It has the congestion of the streets. Right? It has the congestion of the subway systems are great, but they're not very comfortable. Also, just the changes in weather, not to mention, Mr. Blandings experiencing, the trials and tribulations of having a whole family in the 3-bedroom apartment. So it's kind of showing a lot of the antipathy that people were experiencing in cities this time, not unlike the way Mumford was saying that city isn't so intolerable. Okay. And so the last clip I wanted to show was a lot of the trials and tribulations of, Mr. Blandings is so fed up with urban life, that it comes through in an also similarly satirical way. Oops. Maybe move this up a bit.
I'll try your underwear drawer.
I am in my underwear drawer.
They must be somewhere. Socks don't just get up and walk away by themselves.
Muriel, I thought we had it clearly understood that these two and a half top drawers were mine. I thought, what?
That's where they are. We put them in the closet.
Put what in the closet?
Oops. Yep, and he sees the basket and so on. He's just like fed up, and this is kind of making a commentary on that. And the bathroom scene is pretty funny too. And this continues on. Okay.
All I said was, why don't you use an electric razor?
For all of these reasons, Mr. Blanding, comes up with this dream of suburban living, where he's going to go out to the suburbs in Greenwich, Connecticut, and design his own home. Okay, and in a way, this becomes kind of like the American dream, and it's both the government and it's. By the way, this, I think one of the things that Jerka points out in the Jerka reading is that this film is actually funded in part by the FHA, and then it's used as a kind of advertisement for the construction of suburban communities. For example, I'll turn us back to the PowerPoint slide. For example, it's used as an advertisement for the General Electric Dream Kitchen that is in the that's in Mr. Blanding's the film itself. As well as, the film is used in advertising and promotional material for the construction, not only of various suburbs throughout the United States. You can have a dream house just like Mr. Blanding. It says this advertisement for Bel Air, California, but also you can have a car just like Mr. Blanding. It's a dream car to fit at your dream house. Okay, so I think that this film encapsulates a lot of these historical trajectories and more, right? But at this point, I'll just open it up to general reactions. If you have any general reactions about the film, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, some of the surprising things, and then we'll get into the readings themselves and go through those two readings sequentially. Christina, what did you have to think? What did you have to say about this film?
For me watching it, it felt like this story wasn't at all like far-fetched. It didn't feel like an outdated story at all. It was like very current, especially like COVID times, the amount of people who have left the city, because their apartment was too cramped or too small and they wanted more space. Like, I feel like there were just a lot of connections there, and just every like construction project. This feels like an episode that it could happen on like HGTV. Like, it just feels really not outdated at all, just like very present.
Okay, Jack, hold on for a second. I would like to respond to that because during COVID, during the past year, my wife and I have been just watching, for some reason, we've just been binging home, what is it called? House Hunters renovations. right? And we thought that I was like, wow, this is like a dramatization of that whole story. It's like they always in that show House Hunters renovations, the people are trying to find a home, and they're usually in a cramped a cramped setting where they're like fighting over mirror space to brush their teeth, that kind of thing. And you can see it kind of in a dramatic way here. And they're all, and once they find their home, they're always incurring unexpected costs. Something always goes amiss. There's always, sometimes there's a confrontation between the two people that are buying the house. So yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying about that, Christina. Matt, and then Jack.
Some of the humor was a little bit more relatable than I thought some of the past movies were, and some of the conflicts as well. Some of the kind of the trope of the wife, the husband suspecting the wife of cheating, kind of the old love interest that was going on, and then some of the kind of the quips that the children have in the movie are a little bit are just they feel a little bit more modern than some of the humor in the past films.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. So if you were write a film review about this, like in your conclusion, I would definitely stress that. Why does it feel modern? So to press out a little bit further, Matt, why do you think that it feels modern? Like I hear what you're saying, but like what do you think is the reason why it feels modern to you, or is relatable, in other words?
I think because it's more family centric, a little bit more centered on the family and sort of like that dynamic. And it kind of focuses a little bit more on a more I hate to keep using the word modern, but it strikes me as a little bit more relatable to in terms of the family structure, and that kind of is where most of the humor comes from, is from those family conflicts and those family interactions that we get more of today.
Okay, we're going to move on to Jack, Allison, and then Diana. But before we do that, I'm just going to open it up to the rest of everyone else. I think that you're not alone, Matt, when you say that this like the dialogue and the narrative kind of feels modern, and kind of that some of the lines and the quick quips are kind of make sense today. Why do we think that this is a modern and a modern movie, and it kind of resonates with viewers today? Why do people think that? And to answer that, people you can just call out, because I'm gonna or yeah, just why do we think that this is a modern film and that kind of it would resonate with audiences today?
For like to go off that, for me, it was really shocking to see the kids, like the two daughters, like questioning their dad and openly like criticizing him, and the talk about like their education, like them having like really progressive ideas, and their dad being like, oh, you don't know anything, like just wait until you're paying for it. I feel like that was a really modern, like, and that could be like talked, or like that same scene could be reenacted today and it would make sense.
Yeah, totally. I think that's true. Yeah. So like for example, the kids' progressive ideals that they're getting for education. So like those can be little stories unto themselves. They could have been, but it wasn't in this film. Anyone else want to suggest why this might be like why might this film resonate with today's audiences?
Well, I grew up in a 3-bedroom apartment in the city, so it was really funny to see that sort of like, it was very exaggerated, because like I didn't feel like I ever needed to leave to the suburbs, but I mean, it was obviously discussed by my parents at one point, and they objected. But I just found, especially the opening scene, to be sort of relatable, as like, if you're thinking of any reasons to leave New York, it is probably the crampedness and the fast pace. And if you don't like that, then you really shouldn't live in New York.
Yeah, I think underpinning all those things is just like this sense of space. Like, reason why people are moving out is just that they want more space, and they want, and with that, the freedom of movement, whether that be in your home, in your house, or on the streets, or just commuting. But then again, like, he does move out there, and one of the things that was relatable to me as a person that grew up in the suburbs, like, you got to be really scheduled if you want to, either go to school in the city or have a job in the city. You have to like get someone to drive you to the train station. You got to get up like 3 hours early so that you can have enough time to commute. And I think they stress that a few times in the film. So that at least that was kind of relatable to me from my perspective. Does anyone else want to touch on why they think that this film could be relatable to audiences today?
What I was gonna say is kind of like similar to that about, I think, the interaction again between like the daughters in the beginning and the dad, and the film's comment on advertising culture. I think that's still very relevant today. And I kind of felt that it was ironic because it's one big advertisement for the suburbs, but there's also that underlying kind of commentary in the beginning about the daughter saying like, hey, like you work in advertising culture, but this is like a predatory culture. And then the dad gets sucked into it as well with this false advertising. And I mean, like consumerism still happens today. So that's still very relevant.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. So it's like a self-reflexive commentary. So it's like, consumerism surrounds us and we're part of it and we create it, but also we feed into it as well. Yeah, Mary, did you have something to say, or is it something else?
Yeah, kind of in response to that, because when I was watching that part where the daughter was kind of making the commentary on commercialization, like it felt like a very modern statement that I would hear like in a university. And so I was like, I wasn't sure how to take that, because like bringing in the context of the film and what it was meant to do, I was like, there's no way. And I wasn't, at first I wanted to take it like, oh, they're making commentary on commercialization. But I think that personally, I think that should be taken like in the opposite way. I think it might be like audiences might take that as like, oh, like living in the city, like your children learn these ideas, because like Mr. Blandings was very annoyed by that, obviously, because like he works in advertising, and he like just like his commentary he made around like his daughter's statements, I think it was supposed to be seen in like a he's annoyed kind of way, and it's supposed to also fit in with like how he was annoyed with the cramped living space and he has no room in the bathroom. I felt like that was trying to be presented as like part of what he was annoyed with. So it felt actually like less like modern in that sense, that portion of it. But then again, I also think that the reason why this film it doesn't feel so outdated as maybe like we might initially think it is because of like, I mean, this objectively, this wasn't really all that long ago. And it's like, I think we like to think that, oh, we're so different from then, and we are different in many ways, and there's a higher awareness for a lot of things, but like we still like live out and we're a part of and like are still feel effects of and like continue and perpetuate consciously, subconsciously, like a lot of these different things. So I think that's also why it doesn't feel so outdated as well.
Yeah, I think it's very well said, Mary. Thank you very much. Katrina, did you want to add to that? And then we got to get back to the original queue, Jack, Allison, and then Diana. But Katrina, did you want something to jump in?
So I kind of had like a different a way of thinking about it. And I thought that it did point out like an interesting discrepancy in like New York culture, because when they eventually, even though they moved to Connecticut, I think it could have just as easily been like Westchester, Orange County, or somewhere in New York, like a suburb in New York. I don't think it mattered that it was Connecticut. So I think it kind of pointed out an interesting discrepancy that is also still modern in New York, like the city culture versus the suburb or upstate culture. That when you say New York to anyone who's not from New York, they think like, oh, the city, the this, but like it was so different when they moved, and they were talking about like the Zaza water filter or whatever, and he was just like, or softener, and he was like, what is that? What is this? Like, and he just like, there were all these things he didn't think of, and like you said, like to the train, and he was like, it was just clearly like a culture shock to him. Like someone from New York City would identify more with someone from like Chicago or a bigger city than someone like an hour upstate or something like that. Like it's a totally different culture. So I thought it was an interesting point to point out that like it's a totally different world, even though it's Connecticut, it could be like the same state, which is like something we don't think about in like, I guess the history of New York is like the history of the city, not the whole state.
Yeah, certainly. Just to add on that, like as soon as you move out of an urban setting, right, there is immediately a different kind of culture which is tied to different concerns and different values. and just different lifestyles in general. I think that Blanding confronts that directly, and the fact that he's just like not well equipped to deal with a house of his own. Like he starts accidentally locking himself in that closet, has to break the window, all these different things. So he has a lot to learn. It's a big culture shock. Doesn't really seem to end well for him. He ends up losing his job, and just is paranoid that his friend is sleeping with his wife. So I don't know. It doesn't end well for him. But let's get back to our original cue. Jack, Allison, and Diana, about general reactions to the film.
So even though it's like completely a different genre, I just drew a lot of parallels to Mad Men, like specifically through his job, like as a marketing account executive, and the juxtaposition between like the suburban and like the urban and suburban life. And I just thought it, especially like coming within pretty similar time frames too, it just seems like a kind of unique inspiration for it.
Oh yeah, totally. If anyone's seen that Mad Men, like I viewed Cary Grant's character as like Pete Hamlin, that kind of little pesky, annoying dude that goes back. Well, I guess all those all the characters in Mad Men go back and forth from living in the suburbs and having an apartment in the city. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So Allison, did you want to add something like general reactions to the film?
Yeah, sure. So I have like a couple of comments on things that were said,
Sure,
but
yeah.
I think to like Katrina's point about culture shock, I thought that was really interesting because I kind of like experienced that, but the other way around, because I'm from like super far upstate New York, like 6 hours away from New York City. And so I felt that kind of like the opposite way, but I think I even feel that in seeing like suburban culture, like that's a culture shock to me too, because that's so not what I'm used to either. So I just thought that that was really interesting. And then the other thing I just wanted to bring up is that, like, similar to the HGTV comparison, it did feel so much like reality TV. And I think in like a similar line of thinking to HGTV, like we look at these people and we kind of laugh at them, but we do not want to be them, or at least like I do not want to be sort of these people that I'm viewing on screen, even though I sometimes enjoy laughing at their issues. So I thought it had a very sort of like reality TV feel.
Yeah, definitely. And all of the issues that he experiences is kind of like cast in a comedic tone. Even just all the extra expenses that he he incurs. The audience is supposed to laugh at that as well. Okay, what occurred to me was what might be a useful exercise, because I want to get to Diana, because I know you had a pressing concern, but maybe we can like kind of map out this suburban culture as it's depicted in the film. But Diana, did you have something that you want to mention or no?
No, it was what I was going to say before about the advertising culture, so I covered it.
Okay, great. So let me quickly, if we can just put some some descriptors on the board. Suburban culture, and then culture. So at least, as far as, we saw in the film, what are some characteristics of urban culture in this film? And you could just shout out if you want. I'll write these down as if it were like a blackboard. What are some characteristics of urban culture? And when we talk about urban culture, we're talking about the values of of a city setting, the fears of a city setting, the concerns of in a city setting. So, what are some aspects of urban culture that we see in this film? Well, at least, as far as I can tell, like, Blandings is very concerned about, education for kids, right? He's concerned about having enough space in his home.
Being at like the center of business.
Okay, yeah, close proximity to business. Right. What other aspects of urban culture do we see here?
I think access to transportation was important too.
So that's something that he ends up lamenting when he moves to Greenwich Village, Greenwich, Connecticut, which, by the way, I think that he continues a secondary residence in the city. This is like a second home for him. So access to transportation. What else? What is he fearful of in the city? Or what are they as a family fearful of? Nicholas, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to say everything's very expensive.
Okay, so money.
You know, yeah, money concerns.
Money concerns. Okay. What about suburban culture? What do you think? How would we describe suburban culture as it's depicted in this film? I'll begin by just saying that there seems to me, at least, you know, in this depiction, a great pride in owning your own home, a single family dwelling, right? Pride in single family home ownership. Like, he's super proud about this. I mean, it's a vision, a dream that he shares with his wife, and supposedly with you know, many Americans at this time. There's also a pride in you know, stewardship of American heritage, because part of the selling point, even though it's like a crappy property, is the fact that, you know, General Gates, whoever that is, you know, watered his horses there at the residence. So pride in stewardship right? What else? What else is how else can we describe suburban culture as it's depicted in this film?
There's an acknowledgement of the infrastructure around the housing developments. So you see the construction workers, you see the well workers, you see just all contractors, all manners of people going in, like just the whole process and everyone involved in it of the infrastructure of the housing boom that's happening at the time.
Yeah, it's a detailed description of the various different aspects of it. You even have workers. There's some social commentary, like it comes at the end where there's, I think, it's a carpenter and he's staining the floors, and he makes some kind of quick quip at Mr. Blandings. He says the Republicans aren't in office yet, aren't in power yet. So he's making a commentary on there saying that, like, you know, part of this suburban development is tied to the fact that you have a Democrat in office that's, you know, that's pushing a lot of these federally focused programs. So he's saying, you know, the Republicans aren't in office yet, and the next president that would come into power would be Eisenhower. How else would we describe this suburban culture?
There's a certain customization of the house, especially with all of the wife's details, and kind of like making this like property or home feeling like their own.
Yeah, so customization of dwelling, which you can't necessarily get in you know, I mean, you can get it, but not to the same degree, because they are building their own house, whereas, you know, the house that they were in, the apartment of it building that they were in, had probably been there for several decades before that. Okay, so there's a customization, there's a individualization that comes with it, the suburban culture. Whereas, you know, there's more of a collective in cities. Okay, so I think this film really gives us a strong sense of many of these suburban values, especially as they're related through Mr. Blandings' fears, desires, and concerns. So I think that was good. Any other questions before we move on to the readings? Okay. All right, so let's start with Kenneth Jackson really quick. So I'm going to move to the readings. I'll just bring them up really quick here. Kenneth Jackson, Crabgrass Frontier. This is an older text, but it's a classic text in urban history. 1985 came out, but nonetheless is one of those classic texts in urban history that shows a lot of the governmental infrastructure that created suburbs, but also created the racial segregation that occurs in the 1950s through suburban development. So my first question for this reading is, so what were some of the incentives for people to move out to the suburbs between 1920 and 1970 that Kenneth Jackson kind of brings up? What were some of the incentives? So immediately we already talked about like the FHA and the Homeowners Loan Corporation. So these are governmental infrastructures that are, basically providing, favorable interest rates for suburban developers and people moving out to the suburbs, but also, literally paving the road from the city to the suburbs by creating federal, highway projects that convey people out there as well. But did you come across any other big incentives that are drawing people out to the cities, out of cities into the suburbs? No. Okay, let's see if we got it. Find some things here. Maya Perry, would you mind reading this paragraph here? Can you read this? Is it too far? Just this paragraph here.
On the urban suburban level, the potential for federal influence is also enormous. For example, the Federal Highway Act of 1916 and the Interstate Highway Act of 1956 moved the government to, sorry.
Sorry, I keep moving it. I'm trying to make it easier for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good now. Toward a transportation policy emphasizing and benefiting the road, the truck, and the private motor car. In conjunction with cheap fuel and mass-produced automobiles, the urban expressways led to lower marginal transport costs and greatly stimulated deconcentration. Equally important to most families is the incentive to detached home living provided by the deduction of mortgage interest and real estate taxes from their gross income. Even the reimbursement formulas for waterline and sewer construction have had an impact on the spatial patterns of metropolitan areas.
Yeah, so that's a paragraph that kind of encapsulates many of the impetuses and incentives for people moving out to the cities. Number one is creating that infrastructure, the road infrastructure that's going to accelerate the movement of goods, but also the movement of people too. So the fact that there are now highways accelerates the development of suburbs. Not to mention the cheap fuel and mass production of automobiles also, conveys those people out to the cities, out of cities as well. And then of course the incentives for detached suburban living. That are conveyed through low interest rates for mortgages, but also through advertising. And I think that one of the things that the Jerka reading does well is basically saying that this film itself is serving as kind of an advertisement for suburban living. That kind of replicates and accelerates suburban living and suburbanization in the 1940s and 1950s. Okay. Yeah, so this was a kind of a dense read, right? But I think it was nonetheless also super valuable because it told us about the Homeowners Loan Corporation and what that did, and that how it was that kind of was exacerbated by the FHA. So I think that if you were going to do your historical film review on this film, I think that you would have to tie in Kenneth Jackson's arguments at some point, right? Any general reactions to this reading at all? There are a lot of sections about Newark, which I found pretty interesting. Also, I thought this reading was super helpful for understanding the process of redlining. Okay, there is on page 201 important section I thought we should read together, kind of illustrate the process of redlining. Just find this for us. Okay, so Sloan, would you please read this paragraph here, starting with as, and then Mary R, would you then take the next paragraph after that, like St. Louis? So Sloan, can you start with as? Here.
Sure. As was the case in every city, any Afro-American presence was a source of substantial concern to the HOLC. In a confidential and generally pessimistic 1941 survey of the economic and real estate prospects. It's gone.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Oh no.
Prospects of the St. Louis metropolitan area, the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, the parent agency of the HOLC, repeatedly commented on the rapidly increasing, I don't want to say that word.
Yeah, of course.
Population and the resulting problem in the maintenance of real estate values. The officials events a keen interest. Okay, in the movement of Black families and included maps of the density of Black settlement with every analysis. Not surprisingly, even those neighborhoods with small proportions of Black inhabitants were usually rated 4th grade or hazardous.
Right. So before Mary, you pick up, basically what this is saying is that the HLO, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, basically was saying that, you know, the interest rates and the federal benefits were allocated on a racial basis, right? So Mary, would you like to please pick up on for the next paragraph?
Sure. Like St. Louis, Newark, New Jersey, like St. Louis, Newark, New Jersey has long symbolized the most extreme features of the urban crisis.
Hold a quick pause for a second. All right. Yeah. So that's an important concept that we're going to be covering in the next few sessions, this concept of urban crisis. So what the urban crisis is referring to in this context is the condition of cities, you know, in the aftermath of all of the suburbanization and deindustrialization, which we'll get into, which is basically, you know, many people think of the urban crisis, and it's many things. It means many things. It means a time frame. It means, you know, basically from the end of the 1950s through the 1980s, where cities, it seemed, had reached a low point. Not just New York, but also Newark, New Jersey, Detroit had reached a low point in terms of the way in which those urban municipalities could care and provide services for its residents. Okay, so that's the urban crisis. We're going to get to that. It's just contributing to the urban crisis. But please go on, Mary.
In that troubled city, federal appraisers took note in the 1930s of the high tax rate, the heavy relief load, the per capita bonded debt, and the strong tendency for years for people of larger incomes to move their homes outside the city. The 1939 Newark area residential security map did not designate a single, sorry
about that. Yep.
That's okay. A single neighborhood in that city of more than 400,000 as worthy of an A rating. High-class Jewish sections like Weequahic.
It's called Weequahic.
Weequahic and Clinton Hill, as well as non-Jewish areas like Vailsburg and Forest Hill, all received the 2nd grade or B. Typical Newark neighborhoods were rated even lower. The well-maintained and attractive working class sections of Roseville, Woodside, and East Vailsburg were given third grade or C ratings. The remainder of the city, including immigrant Ironbound and every Black neighborhood, was written off as fourth grade or hazardous.
Yeah, so I think this gives us a good snapshot of how basically federal benefits were allocated both on a racial and ethnic basis. So if there's a more prevalence of ethnic or racial minorities in a city, that the lower rating it would get, especially in places like Newark. So I think that was at least useful. And it just occurs to me that we're running out of time. We need to get through this. So let's move on to the Jerka article real quick. So some questions I had for this is one question is how does this film present a kind of advertisement for the American dream? And I'll just ask that openly for the class. If you have a response to that, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. How does this film, Mr. Blendings Builds His Dream House, represent an advertisement for the American dream? Yeah, Mary.
I think because it acknowledges like the difficulties of like suburban building, but at the same time, it kind of like at the level of the plot of the movie, it like resolves all that and it shows that at the end, like, oh, it's all worth it. He got everything he wanted. He was able to keep his job and like he got what he was able to move out of the city and he doesn't have those problems that he experienced before with like the cramped space and all that. So it just kind of like takes it acknowledges all the problems, resolves them at the level of the movie, and it kind of promotes this like narrative or this idea of that moving to the suburbs is going to be so much better.
Yeah, so it's definitely a romantic narrative that's conveying about moving to the suburbs. Shelby and then Katrina Lambert.
Yeah, just going off of that, how it kind of just promotes this dream house in general, and how that this is something that you can achieve as well. If Mr. Blandings can do it, you can do it. And it's just kind of promoting this American ideal, kind of how I think the reading mentioned it was like during a time where like communism was something that people were threatened by and everything. So this was something that promoted this really American dream and ideal. And I kind of also connected it to today and like the American dream, coming from like an immigrant background, and how the American dream here in New York City isn't to just stay in an apartment always. It's kind of to like move out and go to the suburbs or find a bigger house, or that is the American dream to a lot of immigrant communities. So I kind of saw a connection there between the American dream back then and then the American dream today.
That's really interesting, especially coming from that perspective. So Rachel and then Katrina, did you still have your hand up? Okay, great. And then Katrina, and then Gabriella has something in the chat. I'll echo. So Rachel.
I was just going to say, I thought it was really interesting in the reading how they talk about like fear of the spread of communism. And I think it kind of like the movie kind of embodies this idea that like building this house is their biggest issue, and it like shies away from any like actual social issues that people are facing at the time, which are probably like a lot larger than like what is happening with like the well or like the actual like the staining of the floors. And so I think it kind of shows like, oh, this is your biggest issue, and like you don't need to worry about the other social issues that are going on.
Yeah, and also you brought that up, and I also highlighted that too, Rachel, that aspect about the anti-communism and how this is a specific plot that's kind of conveying the values of American culture this time. But I also want to stress that this is part of also the production code, the Hays Codes. So the Hays Codes play a big role here in structuring a specific plot that's conveying specific American values in an anti-communist point of view. So at least that there's some carryover from last week's lecture. Katrina, then we'll get to Gabrielle's comment.
I also thought it was kind of like almost reflective of like the manifest destiny and like that like Western frontier that like I feel like has been like very like central to like the American dream and like everything, and then almost like wants to like strive to like remind Americans of like that that past of like being like self-starters or whatever, like moving out into different areas of the country and like building your house from like the ground up and like that kind of thing. Which like almost like if the movie is like targeted to just get like, you know, white people within the cities to move out, I feel like that's like a very like good way to kind of do that, like remind people of like, I don't, it's not really the good old days, but like maybe in their mind, like the good old days of trying to like become self-starters and moving out and of cities and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really good point. One thing I wanted to bring up here on page 22, but and Gabrielle, I'll get to you. Oh, Katrina Cullen also has something to bring up, but I just wanted I flagged this in the article. In the 40s, Hollywood films were widely recognized as crucial ideological tools in the campaign to convert the rest of the world to capitalism in this, you know, ensuing Cold War after the World War I. As a place where, quote, millions around the world obtain most of their ideas about the United States, Hollywood that is, they possessed a unique ability to sell American goods and American ideals in every land. So it's a kind of like advertisement, not only of suburban living, but of American living as well. So the film industry, Hollywood specifically, made its product available for nationalistic propaganda in times of domestic crisis, such as war. Mr. Blandings suggests the ways in which the medium of Hollywood could also be adapted to address a crisis of its own, particularly referring to the Cold War. Okay, real quick, we'll talk about Gabriella and then Katrina's comments. Gabriella says, echoing off of what Mary was saying, I think that the movie shows that American dream because it shows an American family moving up in society, moving to the suburbs. So it's like if you work hard enough here, you can build your own dream house, and it's kind of showing people that that kind of aspiration of suburban living. Katrina Cullen then says, I thought the same thing that Rachel thought. The movie highlighted a very specific group of already upper middle class wealthy families in the city as opposed to an average New York City family at the time, and their very specific issues. Certainly upper middle class, and certainly just exclusively white. I think there's only one non-white character in the film. Does anyone remember who that is? It's actually their maid that lives with them. And I thought that was significant because it's almost like a carryover of the Jim Crow imagery that we saw in The Jazz Singer, particularly with the mammy archetype character. And this comes through strongly at the very end of the film, where he's searching for an advertisement. He's like, you know, floundering to find his advertisement. And just really quick, because I think it's worth noting, he finds his advertisement, you know, that the slogan that he's looking for at the very end. It's actually that mammy character, that the archetype that kind of gives him that that's another salient quote.
Well, I'm on a kind of vacation.
You mean you got fired?
No, not exactly.
Come and get it, everybody. Breakfast is ready. Oh, good. I'm starving. What are we having, Dusty? Orange juice, scrambled eggs, and you know what? Ham? Not ham. Wham. If you ain't eating wham, you ain't eating ham. Now you kids go wash your hands.
And that was like a lightning bolt for him. So obviously extremely racist depiction, not unlike, you know, the kind of scandal that Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's rice is currently embroiled in. And so in this, we can see, you know, again, the extent of Jim Crow imagery, you know, stretching from depictions of blackface minstrelsy like those in the Jazz Singer to just like, you know, print media replicating those images. And we see that in this film as well. I just wanted to bring that because I think that's the only non-white character in this story. Obviously, you know, impinged by the limitations of that time. Okay, so we only have a few more minutes left, because I know it's been a long time, but I'd like us to break off into groups. Okay, I have, I think, a few different film reviews that I've organized for you. Two different ones. So New York Times, both from New York Times, one from 1947, 1948. So I'm going to break you off into groups. I would like you to read those, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about them together in a setting. Okay, so we're looking at, see, 6 groups, 5 to 6 people each. So I'll break you off into groups and I'll see you in your individual groups. Okay, so see you soon.
How long have y'all been here?
Hey folks, how you
Not
guys
long.
doing? Oh, sorry, sorry to interrupt. How you all doing?
Good.
No, I'm sorry.
Did you like the movie? It's all right.
Yeah.
It was a little slow, but I thought, you know, it did resonate with me a little bit. You know, I did agree with a lot of things what people were saying. The way the dialogue was pretty funny sometimes, especially his daughters. You know, the way they responded to him. But yeah, how are your other classes doing? You're doing okay for the semester? Good.
It's as good as it's as good as it can be, I guess.
Really? Okay, good. All right. So any other questions for the class so far? No, this is pretty much the typical format, you know, what we're going to be doing each week. Okay.
I had a question actually.
Sure. What's going on?
I know the film review isn't due for like another month or so, but like around how I might say it on the syllabus, I just didn't look, it just came to mind. Around like how long should it be?
I think 3 to 4 pages. So 2 of those 3 to 4 pages. Okay. All right. So I'm going to touch base with the other groups and see how they're doing. You should be reading those 2 reviews. So we'll talk about them together. So I'll see you soon. Bye. Hey folks, how you doing?
Hi.
Hanging in there?
Mm-hmm.
What is
We're
it?
doing good. Knocking these out.
Week 5. So we're about halfway through. Well, not yet halfway, but we're approaching the halfway point. How are your other classes going? You're getting through the semester, okay? Right.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
pretty.
What was that? Parker?
I said, yeah, the other class is going pretty good.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any questions about this class so far? This is pretty much like the typical format that we're doing, you know, basically watching films and then talking about them in a historical context. Okay. All right. I'm going to touch base with other groups, but I'll see you soon. We're going to reconnect in like maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll get out of here early. Okay. See you soon. Bye.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, folks, what's going on? How we doing? Hanging in?
Good. Yeah, we're just reading the each of the reviews.
Okay, great. I just wanted to touch base and say that, like, this is like the typical format that we're going to be doing. Basically, reading, watching films, reading some context of the films, and then discussing them. So that's pretty much what we're going to be doing. Any questions about your film reviews coming up? I mean, it's still a month away for the first one's due, but at this point, you should be well equipped to write an excellent film review. Good.
Is it strictly like that? It should fit into one of the week's themes?
Yeah, exactly. So
okay,
I'd encourage you to review one of these films, but if you want to go off the syllabus, try to fit it within one of the themes, one or more of the themes at least. Try to tie it back to the content of the course. Okay. How are your other classes going, by the way? How's your semester going generally?
I would say pretty good. I think most of my classes have like a few larger assignments as opposed to like week to week.
Yeah.
Like at least, like I'm saying, at least for the class, for the parts of like the count the largest towards the syllabus are larger assignments, and I guess it's kind of different than some of my past classes. So I thought that was nice.
Yeah, I think I've restructured my syllabi along those lines too. Larger assignments worth more of your grade, but that are done over a longer period of time. Okay, good. Does anyone have any in-person classes right now or no? No. Yeah. I think that I don't know. I really don't know what to expect for the fall. All right, I have a couple more groups that I want to touch base with, but we're gonna reconvene in about 4 minutes. Okay, so I'll see you then.
thank you.
Yeah, of course. Hey, folks, how you doing? How are you doing? So you should be reading through the reviews, but I wanted to see how your semesters are going outside of the class. Is anyone experiencing any issues?
When we were shut down for 2 weeks, it was awful. Because like we didn't have football, and so like it threw a whole wrench in like my daily routine. But other than that, like now that we're back and everything, it's much better.
So hold on, we shut down for a week? We shut down for 2 weeks? I was unaware of this.
Oh yeah. Like we like maxed out our COVID cases or whatever. So like we didn't have any more in-person classes and we couldn't do any like in-person activities.
John, are you doing in-person classes this semester?
No.
No. I don't know who is doing in-person classes, but I did hear that it was like 250 COVID cases in like the past like 3 weeks, and it was like ridiculous. And I think it has gone up since then. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it was only at Rose Hill though. Lincoln Center was still open. Like I have an in-person class and I was still able to go to it.
You have an in-person class this semester?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Is it full? I couldn't imagine it being full. I'm sure there's a lot of people missing from that.
No, it's most people go to it online. There's a couple people that go to the in-person class. It's like a stats class, so it's kind of helpful to be able to have the professor there in person.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. Okay. All right, so take a few more minutes and we're going to reconvene and probably get out of here a little early. Okay. So I'll see you soon.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. Hey folks, how are we doing?
Good. We just talked about both reviews.
Okay, we're done with the reviews. Okay, I'm going to call people back in the next few minutes, but I just want to ask you, how are you doing? Outside of the class, everything's good? You're okay?
Yeah, all good so far. Nothing really to complain about. I'm a little nervous for midterms, but other than that, I'm all good.
Yeah, excellent. Dylan, are you a senior or no?
No, I'm a junior.
Junior, okay. I know Kayla's the last semester senior, so you're
I'm
not?
I'm a junior.
Why did I think you were a senior? I had Kayla last semester, and Ian too. Ian, are you a junior or senior?
I'm a junior.
Oh, you're a junior too. Okay, never mind. Okay, so for Kayla, and is anyone else, Gabriella, are you a junior?
by credits, I'm a junior, but I'm technically a sophomore.
Oh, okay. Is anyone looking for internships this summer?
Yeah, I still am.
Like, okay, well, I'll start with Gabrielle. Like, what area of internships are you trying to get into?
Well, I have a variety of interests, I guess you can say, but I really am hoping to go into like the costuming industry for
really?
film and television. That's sort of like my background right now, but honestly, I'm good with whatever. I also like journaling. What is it called? Oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm blinking. I really want to work as a journalist on like a fashion magazine, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm keeping my options open in life. So
Yeah, as you should. I don't like to use the word should, but like, yeah, definitely keep your options open. Okay, and real quick, Dylan and Kayla, are you both looking for internships at this point or no?
I'm sort of looking, but I could also continue my internship that I'm currently in that I've been doing since last summer.
Oh, okay. What's that, if you don't mind me asking?
I interned for Senator Biaggi. She's in the New York State Senate, which is really cool. I'm learning a lot, and it's a very interesting time to be sort of in the world of politics.
Yeah, a state senator then, right?
Yeah, state senator. Bronx and Westchester.
Interesting. Kayla and Ian, do you remember Court McElroy from our class? So
Not that I know of.
he used to do ROTC, and he used to come a little late because he was doing the training, but actually he also oftentimes was like the first person there. He's also trying to get an internship at like a congressman's office and so on. So I don't know if that's interesting for you, but it's interesting from my perspective. I'm writing all those letters of recommendation, and that's just to say, if any of you need letters of recommendation and they want them from me, and I can do that for you. All right. But yeah, of course. Let me know how I can help. So I'm going to touch base with one more group. We're going to actually I'm going to call it, and we're going to talk about these. So I'm going to bring us all back together. It's so weird that we've just been conducting classes online, for the past 3 semesters. But anyway, all right, I'm going to call people back, and I'll see you soon. All right, welcome back, folks. Okay, so we had to read 2 film reviews, both from the New York Times, it looks like. Let's see, one from 1947. Open that up. And one from 1948 as well. Okay, so what did your groups talk about? What are these film reviews about? What did they say? What are some of the praise? What are some of the critiques? And then finally, how does this film kind of reflect this history of suburbanization as it pertains to New York City? Okay, so let's start with praise. What kind of praise did these reviews offer for this film? Anyway, oh, sorry, Riley and Sloan.
I read the 1948 review, and they were praising the humor that came with like the logistics of building the house, and they said that it was entertaining but like very unrealistic.
Okay, so entertaining but unrealistic. Sloan?
I read this same review, so pretty much the exact same thing. Like, it was kind of twofold in its critique, saying that if you think about it as purely like an entertainment, like not like a historic reflection, then it's good, then it's praiseworthy. But if you look at it as a reflection on the housing crisis, then it's like vastly inaccurate.
Okay, all right. Did anyone else want to add to what how these film reviews praise the film? What are some other aspects of praise that these film reviews had for the films? Yeah, Maya.
The performance of the actors.
What about the performance?
that it was good, that they were, I guess, entertaining, and and the characters, I guess, were also well written, was something that review said. I forget what it was, but like delightfully something they said about the wife.
Okay, so the wife. Matt Donovan.
The 1948 one also talked about how witty just in general it was, but especially some of the dialogue with Bill Cole as well as I think they called the wife whimsical was what they called her, as well as the children. It really just kind of heaped praise on everyone for how witty it was.
Okay, Bill Cole. All right. Anything else for praise? Anyone else? Katrina Cullen.
I'm not really sure if this is a praise or a reflection, but the 47 one kind of talked about how it was just a smart move on like film production companies to be moving from Hollywood to New York City, because they didn't have to like build extravagant city sets or anything like that, and it looked much better than like a green screen in the background. So it was cheaper to do that. So they were just kind of saying that it was working for films that began doing that.
Cheaper production by shooting in the city. Okay. Strangely enough, like this is something we're going to see in the 1960s with Mayor John Lindsay. He totally tries to, bring Hollywood to New York City in very specific ways. Sebastian, do you want to contribute to these comments?
Yeah, I also thought that was interesting, especially since at the time it mentioned like some big, movie producers not having the faith in that move. So, and then just regarding Mr. Blandings, I guess one of the only things that could possibly be praised that they said about that actual movie is they in the 47 one, it suggests that it could be a special guilt-edged experiment, the movie.
What do you think they meant by that? Guilt-edged?
Yeah, it's GILT. I don't know. I looked it up. I didn't know it. Like it says that it's like could be a high quality investment. So maybe that's partially attributed to like just the high quality of the movie as well as the move that Katrina mentioned.
Okay, Christina P.
The New York Times 1948 article review talked mainly about like how unrealistic it was, especially like considering his salary and like the rising cost of it. And then it talked about, oh, it'd be really great if renovations like this actually happen, or if like it all worked out well, and that because like there's no way that he could like go to Connecticut with like a 15,000 salary, and like the entire cost of renovation is like 15,000, and they had all these additional costs, and it didn't make a lot of sense. But like the characters were nice and charming.
Oh, okay, the character is nice and charming. Okay, great. So was this a reflection of the suburban housing as from what we know about the lecture and what we know from the reading? So was this an accurate reflection of suburban housing, or was it something else? What do we think? What should we put under the category of reflection? One of the things that came up to me is just like it perhaps was not a realistic reflection of the day-to-day expenses and the logistics of moving to the suburbs and having a building a new house. But I think it did offer a good snapshot, historical snapshot of this, the visions of the possibilities of suburban living. So like a vision of or an articulation of the American dream in some way, because they literally are dreaming of the suburban living, and they're having to contend with all the things that they don't like about cities, and that kind of prompts them to move out. We'll go to Katrina, and then I think someone else had their hand up. Katrina, did you want to add something here?
Yeah, I think for the reflection, kind of going off what Christina said, it's kind of like a satirical criticism of the American dream, I think, because like they're showing, you know, with his like, not that it wasn't a good salary for the time, but like that it cost so much money compared to his salary. Like, oh yeah, but don't, like, the American dream's kind of like, it'll all work out. Like the details will work itself out and you'll be great and everything will be great. Like you'll make it work. Everyone will succeed here. Like that's kind of what it made it seem like, especially with all the jokes and all like the powder room and the floor and the tile. Like it was kind of like laughable how it all ended up working out for them, and like it insinuated that that is not like how it's going to happen for normal people, and like that would never really happen.
Right. Okay. I think that was a good response. Diana?
Yeah, for me, I feel like it's an accurate reflection as an advertisement for suburbanization. So like it accurately reflects the idealistic ideals of it. But in terms of like the nuances and like the hardship of like the racial segregation, and also like again, like the unrealistic expense of this, it's not accurate. But as for like depicting what the advertisement of the American dream is, you can kind of really see the ideals that people wanted to aspire to achieve at the time.
Okay. Yep. I think that's true. And so if you were to write about this movie or a similar movie that kind of depicts suburbanization, I would definitely use that Jerker article, because she makes a clear distinction and a clear connection that this movie and movies in particular, and well, movies in general, were at this time used as advertisements to focus in on and celebrate certain American values and ideals, especially in the context of anti-communism. Okay, so I think that was pretty good. So at this point, I'll open it up. I know we have like 0 time left, but if you wanted to vent at all today, this is your chance. I know we did a little bit of venting in the group sessions. So let's open it up. If you wanted to get anything off your chest, you know, and to express anything. I know we did have some things to talk about last week, but it's your time to shine now. If not, we can go. So, all right, we'll just call it. So no class next Wednesday. So you don't have to wake up early on Wednesday next week, but we will resume class Wednesday the 17th. Okay, so March 17th, we'll see each other again. Okay, enjoy. I'll talk to you soon, and I'll let you know if there's any extra credit opportunities that come up. Okay. Until then, have a great weekend and have a great short spring break. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank
Have
you.
a good one.
You too. Bye.